I'm the Vice President of Alectra's Innovation Hub, the Green Energy and Technology Center, which we fondly call the Great Center. I also have the privilege of chairing the board of NSERC Energy Storage Network. So it's a real pleasure for me to moderate a session at today's conference. Joining me today for the panel discussions are 4 industry experts and thought leaders. We will set the stage with each speaker providing a brief introduction and some opening remarks, their perspective, their thought leadership related to the future of energy storage. This will be followed by moderated discussions, so be sure to send your questions via the chat box. Without further ado, I would like to call upon our first panelist, Alexandre Nassif. Alexandre is the Specialist Engineer, Planning and Operations at ATCO Energy.
Sure, thanks, Neetika. Okay, yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm Specialist Engineer in the Planning Group at ATCO Electric. As my lanyard reveals here, I'm in an international assignment as well in Puerto Rico, working the planning activities here. So briefly, I would like to mention some of our past experience with storage. So yeah, at ATCO, we do believe that it is a new paradigm that's here to stay and to proliferate. And we, as technical engineers, we all agree that it can improve power quality, can provide voltage and frequency regulation, and has the potential to extend asset life, and potentially even, if well managed, to allow deferring infrastructure investment. It has to be well managed, otherwise it can actually make things worse, as we all know. As our past experience, we have studied the interconnection of large batteries in our distribution system. 3 of them over 20 megawatts. Some of them were, well, 20 megawatts / 20 megawatt hour. So they were a discharge of C equal to 1. That's what we call, right? As well as some that were connected in companionship with solar farms. We also have experience in installing them in isolated remote communities, converting those diesel communities into essentially off-grid microgrids. Our first one has been recently energized, where we have a 1.6 megawatt hour, 1.6 megawatt battery in conjunction with a 2.6 megawatt solar farm and microgrid controller, where the battery is there essentially to provide grid stability and allow that much generation, solar generation, to be integrated. We believe that, well, we have other experiences too. I'm not going to delve into those, such as non-wires alternatives for small distribution deferment, as well as telecom towers that we moved away from diesel generation and are solely relying on renewable energy and batteries as well. Those are obviously DC, so it's a little different, not really grid connected. And again, for the future, as you mentioned, we really believe that, first of all, what we see today, we see predominantly lithium-ion batteries, if they are being used for electrical applications. But in the future, as technology matures, costs reduce, and regulations allow, we think we're going to be seeing a lot more, and we're going to see some diversification of technologies too, such as longer term storage, such as redox flow batteries, as well as high density power flywheels, or even UPS for customer resiliency. We've seen a lot of exploration, not really connection yet, but we believe it will be in the future a viable. It's going to expand the application, as well as probably going to see some non-wires alternatives being constructed. That's our hope, and it would be really neat as a utility to see that. Again, as a last word, as regulations allow, because today we have some limitations in Alberta or entire Canada, where ownership has a lot of restrictions. We can discuss this during the panel, but we hope things will develop and we're going to see more and more.
Thank you so much, Alexandre. You did bunch in quite a bit of perspectives into your introductory statements, value stacking, some examples of remote use of energy storage, and a perspective on future of energy storage. So thank you for those introductory remarks. Over to my colleague and a dear friend, Ammar Nawaz, who is the Vice President of Distributed Energy Solutions at Alectra.
Thank you, Neetika. Good morning. Thank you, Neetika, once again for having me on the panel. It's a great pleasure to be sharing this forum with my other colleagues. So I'm Ammar Nawaz. I head up Alectra's commercial behind-the-meter business. We work closely with large consumers of electricity, commercial, industrial, and institutional customers to develop, call it bespoke or tailored energy management solutions, recognizing that our customers' energy needs are as unique as the businesses that they run. Our solutions help them achieve long-term sustainability, reliability, and affordability targets that they have set out for themselves. So today I want to talk about disruption from a utility business standpoint and the role that energy storage could play for utilities in successfully pivoting and defining the new energy landscape as it unfolds before our eyes. We recognize that recent advancements in technology, vis-a-vis battery storage, rooftop solar, and other alternatives are changing customer behavior. And the growing need to achieve steeper sustainability targets will inevitably alter, one could argue, the way future energy will be generated, distributed, and consumed. Furthermore, our customers today are a lot more aware. This is not a typical utility customer back in the 80s or the 70s. They want to be in control of their energy systems. They care about how their energy is being sourced, its carbon footprint, and most importantly, if their energy provider is environmentally conscious and responsible. This is where I believe energy storage holds the key in transforming a sector that, quite frankly, has seen little transformation in technology or business model. It's a bold statement, but I think we can definitely back that up. In fact, electric power sector as a whole across North America has seen very little radical transformation technology or business model. In over 100 years, since the first utility was founded back in 1908, compare that to other industries that have relatively completely transformed over the same time period, such as telecom, manufacturing, transportation. Things have changed drastically. So why is that? Well, it's partly because electricity is so critical to everyday life and fundamental to powering the economy that the industry had always erred on the side of caution and focused more on reliability and safety as opposed to efficiency, innovation, and expanding customer choice through new products and services. But it's also partly because of the traditional regulatory regime and the market constructs that Alex briefly touched on are partly responsible for that. So as a result, as we go from a centralized to a more centralized construct being brought about on us, as a result of the technological advancements, you need to stem away from single purpose utility assets to versatile resources like energy storage that have the capabilities to perform multiple functions on the grid, to integrate renewables while enhancing the utilization of the existing assets to lower cost. Because for utilities, it really is competition against the alternatives. On the one hand, you have utility legacy costs going up like that. And then you have alternative technologies like energy storage, rooftop solar, drastically declining in costs. So in a lot of the jurisdictions, you've already achieved grid parity, which is a major concern for utilities now, how to transform properly. So with that context, I want to touch on two key questions today. Have we truly unlocked the full potential of energy storage? And if not, then what's required to get there? So with respect to one, have we truly unlocked the potential of energy storage? I would argue we have made strong strides in certain aspects in Ontario. For example, we have done a really good job as a jurisdiction to integrate DERs onto the grid after the Green Energy Act in Ontario, fundamentally changing the grid architecture to support two-way flow of power and have overcome many interoperability challenges. And it's a big accomplishment because this is where it starts. You need to be able to integrate these resources onto the grid before you can start leveraging them for other purpose. However, on the other hand, energy storage still remains largely underutilized due to lack of revenue stacking opportunities to monetize additional benefits vis-a-vis grid services and power market services. And if energy storage doesn't have access to energy capacity, reliability, and other ancillary products, then quite frankly, you're leaving a lot of value on the table as a jurisdiction, with the potential to even defer the need for traditional infrastructure. So in Ontario, it is particularly important because we have good success in propagating storage for customer benefit. You already have an asset base, and it was brought about due to investments as a result of global adjustment mitigation projects in the province. But you have an asset base, and where you need to go next is to establish revenue stacking opportunities. Now, what would it take to get there? Very briefly, it's a raging debate in many jurisdictions. And it's a question of business model. And the regulatory construct is more or less the same in pretty much all jurisdictions in North America. But there are certain limitations in that business model. And this is where I want to spend a little bit of time, because I think this is where you have the major barriers which have come in the way of utilities and other third-party service providers leveraging these resources for broader benefit. So the business model has a lot of limitations, which was most suited for achieving mass electrification in the past century. But in the age of disruption, it makes utilities extremely risk averse. They don't have a lot of room for experimentation because of scrutiny and prudency test. So utilities have, once again, erred on the side of caution, and this is a broad statement in the context of the whole North American market, and stuck to proven old technologies as opposed to leveraging anything new. So it first begins by transforming the asset-based business model to a value and outcome-driven business model by providing the right incentives for fostering innovation and collaboration in the sector. And I love a quote by one of the former New York governors, Alfred Kahn, and he said, all regulation is incentive regulation, but the question is, what are you really incenting? So in my opinion, the regulators need to incent the right outcomes as opposed to defining the inputs. So for example, today a utility is defined by the asset that it owns. So think about it. Utility is defined by the asset that it owns, but there are means to an end. What we really need to do is to define the utility based on the value that it delivers, which is safe, reliable, and affordable delivery of power, irrespective of how it delivers that value. Whether it's done through energy storage, hamsters in a cage, or new technology that has not been invented yet, right? So it would then allow utilities to more readily integrate advanced technologies, innovate, and reduce cost. Unfortunately, that's not the case. As Alex pointed out, there's still jurisdictions that will not allow utilities to leverage, for example, battery storage as part of their asset base. So just in conclusion, I think the regulatory transformation needs to be at the heart of utility transformation. It's not a technology problem. We have the technology. We have a successful path to commercialization. What we are missing is a third leg of the stool that is a viable regulatory construct and a viable market construct that provides indiscriminate access to these DER resources for revenue stacking opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ammar. You certainly power-packed quite a bit of perspective into your opening remarks. I love the fact that you started with the customer. So thank you for bringing our focus primarily on the customer and then walking from there backwards to what needs to be reformed within our sector. You mentioned you're going to raise two questions, but I only heard one, which was how have we truly unlocked potential of energy storage? Hold on to your second question because we're going to pick it up later when we get into a moderated discussion. With this, I would like to invite our third speaker, Dave Rogers, who's the founder and CEO of AMP.
Thank you, Neetika, and thanks for having me on this panel. It's very exciting. I'll just give you a quick background of AMP. So I started the company, I guess, 11 years ago and started in Ontario in the feed-in tariff days. It came from running a hedge fund where I was trading carbon credits globally and investing in projects and other renewable energy projects in order to trade those credits. So that's my kind of background and perspective. Started AMP, built about 150 megs in Ontario. About 105 of that was actually rooftop. So very early days, obviously the feed-in tariff really incentivized rooftop solar, and the rest was utility. And then we've expanded quite rapidly and globally. And so we have big operations in Japan, operations in Australia, throughout the UK, Prague, throughout India, and throughout North America. We have about 220 employees globally today, and we continue to grow rapidly. And the business is really a developer owner of assets. So we've raised and deployed about $3 billion into an asset base of 1.5 gigawatts that is operational today. We've got another 2 gigs that is in construction. And so part of that, most of it is solar, but there's a big part of that that's also hybrid. So solar plus storage, mainly in the US. We have built a couple of storage projects, so 2 for the City of Toronto. And also we took an indigenous tribe in kind of central BC off grid and built them a full microgrid system with solar and storage and controls, et cetera. And actually that indigenous community, we trained them to actually operate the system themselves. And so it's quite a novel project, and that's energized today. And so we've got a lot of early momentum around storage. We are also building 2 very large in front of the meter storage projects. So one in New York City, that's a 300 megawatt, 1.2 gigawatt hour floating battery storage project, which is a direct replacement for a natural gas plant. It's going to be docked in the Brooklyn Navy Yards and provide congestion relief to Manhattan. And then also a 250 meg, 1 gigawatt hour project in Australia. And so that's our kind of how we break up the businesses. That's our real assets business, and it's solar, hybrid, and standalone storage. About 2 years ago, we started a division called AmpX because, as anyone who has experience in storage knows, the typical management of a solar asset or a wind asset, an easy take or pay asset, is extremely different than managing and optimizing a dispatchable dynamic storage asset. And so we started a division again called AmpX, and at the core of that division is a data science group that come from Engie and RWE. And what that has enabled us to do is provide full kind of VPP and DSM capabilities that are all transactive grid enabled. So as the grids of the future continue to kind of race towards this transactivity, that's something that our team has built. We also have a fundamental view that, adding, because of decarbonization and the addition of all the renewables on grid, what you've done to a grid is you've taken off spinning reserves and added renewables, which don't provide inertia to the grid, which is required. So we actually created within our AmpX division a smart transformer and there's 10 smart transformers that are being implemented this year in central London in the UK. And what that does is it provides dynamic modulation of voltage and power factor. And when networked together, it can provide synthetic inertia to the grid. And so this is something, again, that's within our digital energy division called AmpX, and so it's very innovative for us. But at the core of it, AmpX is able to optimize our storage assets. And one of the things that I think is a big challenge for storage today, although the pace of growth of storage is far quicker than anyone realizes today. But there's 2 things. One is that asset is far more complicated than renewable energy. It's infinitely more complicated and complex. The other piece is that for the most part, storage is delivering merchant services. And so financing becomes a real issue. Because most of the groups that are playing in the storage business come from the renewable energy business, which has feed-in tariff contracts and the like, which are easily financeable. When you've got either energy arbitrage or other ancillaries where you've got that are the services you're providing with that storage asset into the grid, it requires very different understanding and sophistication around financing it. And so what we've done, and we'll talk about this I'm sure later on here, is we have synthetic hedges on most of our storage assets. And that's a financial product that a lot of folks are just thinking about, how do I go and actually now build the storage asset? So anyway, that's the business. We continue to grow. We think storage is a fundamental part and of our future growth. And we're excited to be at this panel.
Thank you, Dave. As we are discussing the future of energy storage, you are actually landing the future of energy storage. Really excited about your two large projects, the 300 megawatt floating battery storage project in New York City. That really, it is a testimony to the kind of value that energy storage can bring in. Really looking forward to more details as we continue our discussions. With this, I'd like to invite our last speaker, Hani Taki. Hani is the Director, Standards and Technical Studies at Toronto Hydro.
Thank you, Neetika, and good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be here, and I want to thank the Ryerson CUE for including me on this panel. My colleagues have done an excellent job setting the right context and providing the background on sort of where energy storage is at and the various issues and challenges that we're all seeing. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what we're doing at Toronto Hydro and focus on our experience in the projects that we've completed or that are currently underway. For those, some of the participants might be, or the viewers might be from outside the area, so I'll just briefly talk about Toronto Hydro. Toronto Hydro is the electricity distributor for the city of Toronto, which is the largest city in Canada. And our peak is usually between, over the last several years, between 4,000 and 5,000 megawatts. And we have almost 800,000 customers that we provide service to, provide electricity to. My role as the Director of Standards and Technical Studies in the Engineering Division at Toronto Hydro, it's very much technical in nature, but one of my responsibilities is around the technical framework for energy storage and planning energy storage projects. And for Toronto Hydro, our activities in energy storage really started about 10 years ago. And at the time, about 10 years ago, there was the major theme in our industry was smart grid. And we had identified energy storage as a key element in the grid of the future. In the following years, and through consortiums and partnerships with industry partners, with government, and with academia, we deployed a number of energy storage projects that allowed us to learn more about this technology and this equipment and to prove concepts. And some of those examples, in 2013, we installed a 500 kilowatt pad mounted energy storage unit at a community center in Toronto. And part of the function that we were trying to achieve is demand response and resilience. That was one of our first projects. In 2015, in partnership with HydroStore, we supported the installation of a compressed air storage unit in Lake Ontario, underwater, off of Toronto Island. That was a 600 kilowatt unit. Again, to prove not only that specific technology, compressed air, but also the functionality on the grid. So that project was in 2015. In 2017, we installed a pole-mounted energy storage unit, battery lithium ion. And that was a much smaller unit, 15 kilowatts on a pole, and it was to support a transformer in that neighborhood and to help them manage the load on the transformer. So these proof of concept projects, they obviously allowed us, like I said, to learn about the equipment, about the technology, to prove certain concepts, and for us to get a better appreciation of what this technology can do. With that experience, and I would say that's sort of the first part of our journey when it comes to energy storage. And with that experience and the learnings from that first phase, we proceeded to larger, more permanent installations with specific targeted purposes. And two of them that are currently underway that I'll briefly describe. One of them is a 2 megawatt unit, lithium-ion battery energy storage, in one of our decommissioned substations. So we have hundreds of substations in the city of Toronto, and as we continue to renew the system, we end up in some cases decommissioning the substation because there's no longer a need for the transformers and other equipment in that station, but we maintain the facility. We still have the building. And so what we've done here is we've repurposed this decommissioned substation into an energy storage facility. And with this 2 megawatt unit, the intent is to help manage demand, to manage load in a specific area of downtown Toronto. So that project will be completed this year. It's currently in construction. And another project that's currently underway is a 10 megawatt lithium-ion battery energy storage project that is part of the new transit line in Toronto, the Eglinton Crosstown Transit Line, providing backup and demand response and potentially other benefits to that line. And so that project is currently underway, very large project, and will be completed this year. So with those projects, one of the main things that we have been focusing on, aside of obviously from actually building and implementing those projects, is operationalization of energy storage. I think my colleagues have mentioned rightfully so that energy storage systems are a lot more sophisticated, a lot more complicated than all the other assets in the system. And so bringing them, it's not only about building them and bringing them online, but talking about operating scenarios and operating schedules and the 24/7 monitoring of various parameters and the various functions you can have out of the energy storage system, and how cycle depth and cycle frequency, how that impacts the life of the asset, and so on and so forth. Optimal usage of the asset to sort of balance the various uses that you want to achieve. So that's something that we've been focusing on quite significantly right now as we bring these major projects into use, and that work is going to continue over the next few years. And as well, in terms of deploying more energy storage projects over the next few years, the areas we'll be focusing on are going to be enablement of renewable generation. Energy storage does help us address some of the constraints on the system to enable more renewables, and as well to help improve power quality. Again, another function that we can get out of energy storage. So those are things that we're going to be looking at over the next number of years. And like my colleagues have said, it's a really exciting time to be in this area and to be involved in energy storage. And we look forward to the continued evolution of the grid and bringing value to our customers through energy storage.
Thank you, Hani, for those introductory remarks, and thanks for sharing Toronto Hydro's journey with respect to energy storage. You certainly have some very inspirational and exciting projects that the industry is keeping an eye on. I remember when we had our first Leading the Charge conference, and I can't see Bala right now, but I'm sure he's smiling as I'm saying this. The discussions in the first conference was a lot about studies and evaluation and testing, and the question was, will this ever land? So not too long ago, just 5 years ago, this was still more like a buzzword and felt a little bit like a science experiment, and industry was not sure how it would land. And here we are. When I listen to ATCO or Toronto Hydro or Dave, the projects that you mentioned, we are certainly come a very long way within a very short span of 5 years. So with this, I'd like to move into our second session of moderated discussions. can I please nudge and coax the audience? I can see there are lots of us out there. Please send your questions by way of the chat box. And along the way, I'd be happy to take some of the questions on your behalf as well. So as going back to the topic of pace of growth, as Dave, you mentioned that there is definitely a strong pace of growth and pace of change. As we've seen over the past few years, it's been quite probably more accelerated than what we would have predicted 5-7 years ago. But Dave, in your case, as your business transcends geographical boundaries, so Texas, California, Japan, Australia, those are probably quicker, whereas other parts of the globe are still catching up. So I'd like to start with you and then move on to the other panelists on what is your perspective on pace of change, especially if you can put on the lens of a long-term impact of COVID.
So, okay, great question. I would say that, so you mentioned some really interesting markets there, right? So we are very active in Texas. We've got 150 megawatt hours that are being built there. And we're also active in California, and Australia for sure is a big market. I would say that those markets are, of course, far more open from a regulatory standpoint than most markets. I mean, the kind of dichotomy there is Japan. I mean, Japan is going to be slow. They're going to be a laggard. They'll do it right, but it'll be slow. And so what you're seeing is, because of California in particular, you know, today still the largest solar or storage market in the world, you've seen price declines that look very similar to solar price declines over the last 10 years. And so that's driving a lot of innovation. That's driving a lot of innovative business models. It's also driving some interesting financing, because now you're seeing not only hybridization of assets being competitive with grid costs, but you're also seeing just standalone storage delivering, as we all know, different services to the grid. And so, you know, and my comment around this is happening way quicker than people realize is because as we see, you know, New York, so just that one example, that New York asset, so they're decommissioning 8 gigs of fossil generation. All those 8 gigs provide congestion relief to New York, to Manhattan, right? And so those are all going to be replaced by storage. And so you're just seeing this mad rush towards that type of opportunity. And it's going to be innovative developers that do that. I think what we're also noticing is places like Massachusetts, I'll just use that example. So they basically have an incentive for battery storage for 20 years. So it's like a feed-in tariff of having battery storage on your site and combined with solar. So that's one way to get there, and that's an interesting way. I would say that is going to, I don't think that's going to stay very long, because as we all know, the storage assets do provide valuable grid services. And today they're either at competitive cost or lower in most markets. And so I guess I look at the declining cost curve. I look at those markets that are far more open from a regulatory standpoint. That is where all the innovation is happening. That is where all the implementation is happening. And that's going to drive better opportunities across all markets as they start opening up. Regulations are a critical piece for sure, as we all know. And I think the opportunity here a bit on storage is that in the beginning of most markets, as storage gets implemented, it's going to be a collaboration between utilities and independent power producers or developers. And you're seeing that, Hani mentioned that as well. So I think that's going to be a critical piece. And so the sooner utilities can embrace that, right, the better it's going to be for grid stability, the better it's going to be for opportunities for investment, which is what we all need and want. And it's better for the financeability, because more products will come to market where you're able to finance the storage assets when they're fully merchant. And that today is still my biggest issue as far as how do we go and implement storage, you know, across multiple markets, is it's going to be the financeability. And that's a critical piece. And that's going to be driven, as I said, through regulations, innovation, and collaboration with utilities.
Thank you, Dave. Anyone else, any of the other panelists would like to chime in? Your perspective on pace of change, pace of growth?
I guess I could chime in. Oh, go ahead, Ammar. I don't want to cut you.
No, go ahead, please.
All right. You're going to go alphabetical order, so Alexandre, you go first.
All right. Yeah, so having a stronger, I would say, experience in distribution systems, and from what we're seeing today, I fully agree. It is an enabler. We see it as an enabler of renewable energy resources that are based on renewable generation, right? So, for example, what we have seen is we've seen great uptake in solar in distribution systems, just like everywhere else in North America, everywhere else in the world. And there's just so much current a distribution feeder can take. And a lot of developers are using a hybrid solution, as Dave mentioned, to be able to not overload our lines. And as you mentioned, Renita, or Neetika, sorry, as you asked about the impact of COVID, that is one thing that we did not see slowing down, the development of renewable generation. That actually, it appears it's more, but it's probably because it's the general trend. It has nothing to do with the being locked down at home. But as we have more of that, we either build thicker lines, which are usually paid for by the developer, and it's very expensive, right? Or they may want to curtail their output using energy storage. And that is something that, fortunately, it's because it isn't, at the stage it is at, there's a lot of support from governmental entities, and we are seeing some successful implementations from those being connected to our system. So they do provide grid support. They have the potential to provide grid support, as we mentioned. Of course, that we don't have, in Alberta, we don't have any proven cases yet, but that's just because of the stage of technology. But we are thinking we will see quite a bit, because we're energizing the larger, a few larger ones like this month, you know. So we are going to see very soon how they fare. In theory, they are very good. And going back to just one more comment regarding the isolated systems, right? Actually, isolated systems in Alberta is the only case where utility can own energy storage because they're required for grid stability. And I'm going to circle back later, but the reality is that you can only take so much renewable energy when you have your base generation. The percentage is small before you can create grid instability. And that's why distribution facility owners are allowed to own battery energy storage for those communities. Now, if you think in a bigger scale, it's all proportional, right? If we have such a large penetration, such as what they see in Hawaii or in Canada, oh no, I'm sorry, in California, my apologies, it gets to a point that you're gonna need that grid stability. And it's not just only inertia. Inertia is a big point, a big concern that today we see that being addressed by manufacturers by programming the controls of the energy storage, but also short circuit contribution. Why is that important? Because that's how we protect our systems. Ammar is going to laugh because that's how we met. We were in the same team, protection, in the past. And to change all of that to a different concept, there will be strong, I'm sorry for no pun intended, but there's a lot of inertia there. It took 150 years to build. It's going to take more than a couple of years to change.
Thank you, Alexandre. Moving over to Ammar.
Yeah, thanks, Neetika. Just building on what Dave and Alex said, I think the pace of change in the industry is very strong, and it's primarily because it's value driven. You know, the cost competitiveness of storage is indisputed. It has a lot of value. Now, there are fundamental questions that we need to address to make sure that you're capitalizing on that momentum. One is the grid interoperability, and I think that's something that utilities, as Hani talked about and as Alex talked about, are dealing with as they get more and more familiar with the with the distribution systems, and they're overcoming those challenges. But what I really want to focus on is, if you look at the use of energy storage today, or for DERs in general, you can broadly categorize them in three buckets. You have DERs that are being used purely for the benefit of providing benefit to the customers behind the meter. And then the DER that could provide grid services, and then DERs that could provide energy and capacity market products and services. But the challenge is you can't have three individual DERs providing three individual purposes. You need to have the same DER providing all three categories of functions for them to be uber competitive. And this becomes even more important in the COVID era, my apologies, because the cost is important. As businesses are trying to recover, you need to keep costs low. So therefore, going back to what Dave said earlier, financeability, you can't finance a DER asset or energy storage asset with merchant revenues with only single revenue stream. You got to be able to have revenue stacking opportunities where there is enough risk mitigation provided for third-party financiers to come and build those assets. And that's where I think regulations and market constructs play a huge role. Just very quickly, Energy Storage Canada recently conducted a study in Ontario, and they identified there's a potential of up to 1,000 megawatt of battery storage in Ontario market system that would potentially provide market services, T&D, grid deferral, and could potentially provide up to $2 billion of benefits to customers and rates. And that's a huge value, right? But then the question is, do you have the right constructs in place to start leveraging that? And the answer is, it will take a little bit of time, as Alex pointed out. But through these discussions, we have to raise awareness on the key and the fundamental issues that the policymakers and decision makers need to take in, and then make that part of their equation going forward.
Thanks, Ammar. Hani, any comments?
I'd just like to add on, what my colleagues have mentioned. When for us at Toronto Hydro, we've experienced some of the challenges, on the policy side, on the regulatory side, and as our regulator, gets more familiar with this technology and its capabilities, and looking at other jurisdictions. But the ability for us, and we have faced similar challenges around, how do we, the revenue streams, and if you are trying to deploy an energy storage system based on maybe there's a sort of a primary function or a primary driver, but then there's all these additional benefits, additional uses that you can employ. That single revenue stream is not adequate to fund the project completely. So we've seen that challenge, and we've seen as well, to some of the earlier points, that on the policy side, getting sort of stuck on assets, looking at assets and where they're located, as opposed to perhaps the function, the outcome, all of those benefits, and how they could benefit the grid. So I think these types of discussions, continuing these types of discussions, is important. And as well, these cases, these use cases, or these projects that we have underway as an industry, and trying to continue to develop, through collaboration, solutions to these various questions. I mean, so there's the technical questions, there's the operational, but then there's all this quantification of the stacked benefits, and bringing together these various revenue streams. How do you make that work? How do you build that business case? How do you balance these various needs and continue to have a healthy asset that continues to function effectively? Those are all various questions that I think through these projects and that we have underway, we can help answer and hopefully influence, the policymakers and the regulators.
Thank you, Hani. So I'm seeing a trickle of questions coming in from the audience. So let's take one question from the audience. So now, Dave, based on your example, you've certainly whet the appetite of the audience. And one of the question is, could we not convert Pickering to 200 megawatt hour battery storage in order to utilize the billions in existing transmission lines? We can start with Dave, since you have some real-time experience with your project, but open to other panelists as well.
Probably on this one, the other panelists are probably going to have a much better view, but I would say, like, just fundamentally, right? I think, so storage it plays a number of different things, of course, as we all know, but one is a replacement, but a replacement for thermal assets that do provide, real-time on-demand dispatchability. Right, so I don't know about Pickering. Actually, the other three panelists are probably way more attuned to this. But I would just say that, to me, it's storage. There's a number of things you can do. A direct replacement for things like nat gas, right? That is a huge opportunity as decarbonization continues to happen globally, right? So and now that specific Pickering plant, I'm not sure. I'm sure Hani and Ammar can have a better view of that for sure.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Dave, that there are certain cases where energy storage can be a direct replacement, and it provides a identical function or close enough that you can have that direct replacement. And then there are cases where energy storage, lithium-ion batteries are different than, for example, nuclear generating stations or hydro or things like that. And that direct replacement, it has its complications. And so I think there are cases where, it would work, you replace one with another, but there are other cases where it won't. And, you get into these more technical issues around the stability of the overall system and whether one resource can provide certain functions around the stability or not, whether it's, steady conditions or you have sort of disruptions on the system. How do these respond? So it does get somewhat involved, but there are certainly applications where I think energy storage could be a direct replacement.
I can quickly jump in on that. I had the opportunity to work at Pickering A and Pickering B early on in my career. So very familiar with the facility. I think it's an interesting question. Principally, it's, yes, there's definitely a lot of value that storage could deliver on the system. But when it comes to T&D, I think the most value, given the price point and other factors that you can extract from storage, is basically anytime you have congestion or peaking relief, which is there for a few hours of the day, not for the entire time period. When you need call it base load growth or extension, you need base load type of assets. Storage is better utilized, for example, if you have a transformer that might be loaded for an hour of the day, and the other 23 hours of the day is absolutely fine. It doesn't make sense for you to go and build a bigger transformer with the bigger breakers and the bigger lines, so on and so forth. You're better off just putting battery storage that will extend, the usability of the transformer on the peaking side. The same concept would go on the transmission lines. If you have congestion in certain areas, it could definitely provide congestion relief. But I think it'd be difficult at this stage to make a case for base load replacement with battery storage. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I'd like to, I guess, if I have a chance as well, to jump on that in the same tone as Ammar. It would be a great engineering challenge to do it, to say how I see it, because if you're replacing a 3 gigawatt nuclear plant that is base generation, always running, right? And it's no emissions. I mean, there are drives to decommission them. I understand that, but I mean, considering solar has a capacity factor of, let's say, 13%. We have to replace that with probably 23 gigawatts of solar. And yeah, it'll be an interesting study to conduct.
So I guess what I'm hearing is if the need is peaky and if it's marginal energy that you're looking for, then a battery storage may be a better application. If you're looking for base load, 24/7 requirement, then perhaps surely battery can be part of the solution, but may not be the only solution. And Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but the New York project that you spoke about, the battery storage project was replacing a pico plant.
Correct. Yeah, yeah, that's right. So it's pure energy arbitrage. So just one of the things that some of the folks said earlier around financeability. So I guess I probably have a bit of a different view. Financeability of an asset like that can be on a single revenue stream with the ability for that same asset to provide other grid, ancillary services, right? So in that specific example of New York, and every example is going to be different, of course, but we are providing pure energy arbitrage, right? So you're charging it at night and discharging it during the day when the grid needs the congestion relief. But you can also provide fast frequency and a number of other services from that same asset. But the financing is coming off of that core arbitrage service.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
That's a really good, that's a good segue into my next question. I want to further, unlock and have discussions on this value stacking, monetization, and the perspective that Ammar threw in. Thanks, Ammar, for mentioning this question upfront. How do you truly unlock potential of energy storage? And we've had some discussion about, Ammar, you mentioned that value stacking is imperative, being able to have the same DER play in multiple markets to deliver multiple services will then make the financing, make the economics feasible. I'd like to, for the panelists to dive a little bit deeper and perhaps explore, when you say you'd like to value stack, how would that play out? So if you've got 4 markets that you're playing in or 4 services that you're delivering with the same asset, how do you, can it be mutually exclusive? Is it an and or? And if there is a conflict, how do you prioritize? Anyone goes first. We are not going to go alphabetical this time.
I'm happy to start if you'd like. I would say that, so it's a great question, obviously, and a topic of debate everywhere. I would say, like, the way that we think about it, at least, so from a private IPP, is, so there's a couple challenges, then I'll talk about the opportunities. The challenges, so one of the challenges today, and it's going to change, but today there's only a few groups that are providing the dispatch signal, right? So, I mean, Ontario is a classic example, right? There was a whole GA run up around people putting battery storage in to kind of miss the 5 peaks, et cetera. And I think what became very clear is that there was really only 2 providers of that dispatch signal. And what you get, and this is a trading, concept and principle, is that you get classic mean reversion, right? Where those peaks are going to change, and then everyone's going to miss the peaks, or those peaks don't become, quote unquote, as valuable or as peaky, if you will. So that is a huge challenge in battery storage, because you only have a few players that are providing the dispatch signal to everybody. It's why AMP decided to go and build our own division that is AI enabled with machine learning, et cetera, building our own dispatch signals, because we didn't want to get into the classic mean reversion issue. As far as kind of the opportunities, so again, financing critical, dispatch signal critical. You've got to have a bankable dispatch signal to get the financing. As far as how you go and choose which service, to me, it's simple. It's value, right? And so if I'm going to get paid X for fast frequency or Y for providing congestion relief, it's really simple. And that's where the machine learning comes in around how do I go and continue to refine those algorithms to ensure that I'm always optimizing value at the asset. With one very simple example, one simple challenge, which is if you've got a financing source that is financing you based on some capacity of providing, let's say, energy arbitrage, that's the only piece that has to get overlaid on the algorithms. And that's why this is, again, so much more complex than a pure generation asset, right? And it's going to continue to be more complicated because it's all about other assets that are on the grid and what services they're providing at what time during the day. So, but that is why it's so critical to have multiple dispatch signals on a single grid, so that you don't have classic mean reversion. It's a critical piece. And yeah, there you go.
And Neetika, I'll jump in and build on what Dave said. I think from my perspective, it's not a technology problem. I think technology and technology providers always respond to positive market signals. If you create a market, industry will figure out a way to respond. And so the question then becomes, well, what type of market do you really have? Take Ontario as an example. There was very, focused and singular type of opportunity in Ontario vis-a-vis the global adjustment mitigation, which was highly risky, but market responded. And market responded aggressively. You have tons of energy storage system right now deployed in Ontario. But the challenge is if you take that one revenue stream away, those energy storage assets now actually can do a whole lot and could even lead to stranded investments for some investors and financiers. So this is where if you open up the market and you allow storage, or for that matter, all DERs to have indiscriminate access to all the ISO revenue streams, whether it's energy, whether it's capacity, whether it's ancillary services, or even let's shift focus to the grid service as an example. Today, the battery storage, which may be behind a customer meter, can provide reliability, can provide frequency regulation, can provide voltage regulation to an extent. But there is no mechanism that exists in Ontario, and for that matter, in a lot of other jurisdictions for utilities to transact with those third-party service providers. There's nothing. How would you pay for that? The regulatory constructs do not have a provision. So therefore, if you, take out some of the barriers and provide the enablers, and with sort of open platform, market will respond, and then market will start to monetize on those revenue stacking opportunities. And it's a win-win for everybody. It's a win for third-party service providers. It's a win for utilities because they don't have to now continue to invest in legacy infrastructure. And best yet, it's a win for the customers because they're getting the best value for their money as opposed to continue to build large infrastructure that doesn't need to be. So again, from my perspective, I think it's a creating the right market problem, not a technology problem. And just finally, with respect to how do you pick and choose, it's a business decision at the end of the day. I mean, it happens in Ontario right now. You have global adjustment mitigation, and then you have DR opportunities. So if it's a global adjustment event, you and your customer both recognize that you need to respond to global adjustment before you do DR, just from the value prop. But if you're committing the same resource to ISO, that might take precedence too. It all depends on the value and the importance of their revenue stack.
This has become like a Facebook status, or what do you call it, relationship status. It's complicated. It certainly is, and honestly, think about it. For an average commercial customer, it used to be really simple. Just flick the light switch on, and their place is energized, and they have energy to conduct business. Now, with the microgrids and energy storage and everything that you just added to it, Ammar, about making decisions on which market to play in, and day to day to figure out which services to bid into. This is now getting extremely complicated for an average consumer. So definitely lots of learnings and lots of it's a long path before the solutions are simplified, and surely there is a huge role for utilities and third parties to make life simplified for the end customer. It will further get complicated as you have local energy markets playing alongside with wholesale energy markets. So definitely lots of opportunity, but I think there's tremendous opportunities in the likes of utilities and third parties to figure out how all of this can shake and bake together so that customers don't have to do all that much thinking. With this, I see there are a bunch of questions coming in from the audience. So audience, don't be shy, keep the questions coming in. And I'm just gonna rattle off a few. Here's a good one. This is by Anshul Goel. In the panelist opinion, storage energy, is it more effective to bid in real-time market or day-ahead market? Anyone want to take a crack at it? Do you think a storage asset is better equipped to deal with a real-time market services or a day-ahead market?
I mean, look, at just from our perspective, right? For the most part, and it's a gross generalization, but I think it's probably fairly true, is that the storage asset just be given the fast dispatch is real-time market driven, right? So the value of a storage asset is going to increase, because it has that dispatchability, dynamic dispatchability. So the real-time market is where you're going to typically capture most of the value than a day-ahead market.
They don't tell you.
Yeah, I think it's a balance, right? I agree that that's probably where you would unlock the most benefit, as well as the fact that storage is used when it's used for this purpose. Well, we need to charge it first, right? And obviously there's a demand charge, and they would probably, well, our customers that have large storage devices, they try to charge it as slowly as as a rate of charge as possible to keep the demand charge low. And that's the complication I see with the real time, because it's not, you don't necessarily predict what time it will be, and you need to be charged to a certain level to unlock the most potential. So I see both applications. I cannot speak to the market, which one is more profitable at all, because I know nothing. That will vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction as well. But yeah, just sharing the experience.
Ammar or Hani, do you have a take on this?
Yeah, I think Alex summed it up really well. It really depends on a particular market, also where that storage asset is really connected, right? So we also have to keep in mind the congestion during different times of the day when that asset needs to be charged and discharged to provide that value. Purely from, Dave is right, from a principal standpoint, yes, that's where storage has the most value. It's very fast, it's responsive, it's there when you need it. But then it's, how do you charge it? How do you discharge it? Where is it connected? Where is the value for real time relative to the day ahead? So I think it's a balance. It really depends on the market.
Wonderful. I think it's also important to see when a bear is chasing you, you don't need to outrun the bear. You just need to outrun your friend. So how is storage placed versus the other generation, the other assets that would be bidding in? So going back to Dave's point, storage is wonderfully fast to respond. My own team at the Great Center, we've done some numerous tests on our powerhouse units, our storage units, and we were delighted with the results of how fast these assets can respond. and that just makes it so much heads and shoulders above the other assets that would be bidding for anything that is fast time. So from that perspective, I think there is I agree with Dave that there is perhaps a better opportunity for storage to play in those markets. But having said that, Alex, you nailed it, where you said it's like literally with the thing with storage is all shapes and sizes. We have a need for all shapes and sizes, and we have they can fit into all type of market services. With that, let's move on to another question. This is a pointed question, and any one of you who would like to take it. Why can't ISO just send out 20 definitive peak signals? No guesswork. Batteries are now designed to discharge thousands of cycles with little derate. So effectively take the guesswork out of what those 5 peaks would be, as we've had some discussions earlier about demand response. So anyone would like to take on this question? Why could ISO not define those dates, predetermine those peaky dates in advance?
Yeah, it would definitely make my life a lot easier, and I think a lot of my colleagues who are, have projects in global adjustment market, that would be awesome. But I think if ISO knew, again, principally speaking, right? So if an ISO knew ahead of time, then they could definitely do that. I do like the fact that the questioner has thought about not 5 but 20, giving themselves a margin of error, and I think you probably could catch those. But there's a concept called elephant in a bathtub, meaning everybody is looking at the peak and they're thinking the peak is coming, and people start shifting only to find out that the peak occurred 15 minutes ago when you thought it was coming, because everybody shifted. So there is a lot of guesswork still involved, and you don't know when the peaks are happening. It's a good construct, and similar to this construct is called interruptible rates, where an ISO will tell you that we're going to interrupt you because we were thinking we think we're encroaching those capacity limits on the system, and interruptible rates are instituted. So that's how I would look at it. But typically coincident peak programs are instituted the same way ISO has done in other jurisdictions as well.
Thanks, Ammar. There's one more question, and this is targeted to the underwater compressed energy storage project of Toronto Island. Fekai Chu, and I'm very sorry if I've mispronounced your name. The question is that in that Toronto Island compressed air energy storage project, what is the discharging efficiency of the system with regards to the power used versus used to charge the system? So I guess if we don't have the facts about that particular project, it may still make a good discussion about the round trip efficiency and how things are looking forward for the energy storage market.
Yeah, because the question was specific to that project. I don't have that information on hand, unfortunately. But I think efficiency obviously is important, but I think it's just one of those factors. The technology, as it evolves, as it gets better, the efficiency is obviously increasing. But I think it's one factor that goes into that into the business case, into the value stacking, compared to various other alternatives that are there. So I think it's one of those factors. And maybe here I take this a little bit on a tangent, if I may, is that on the distribution side, and I know we've been talking a little bit more here about sort of the bulk system, the market, but on the distribution side, when we look at these various benefits of energy storage, and we're trying to make the case, efficiency being one of those factors, like I said, although the cost of energy storage has been dropping significantly, we still find that a lot of the wire solutions, in many cases, the wire solution is still more cost effective than the energy storage solution. And that goes to part of the discussion we had around the revenue streams. And so for us as a distribution utility, we still have, under the current construct, and we've talked about, obviously the challenges on, policy and regulation, but currently the costs need to continue to drop, as well as other revenue streams need to become available, and then that way battery energy storage will become be a stronger option versus some of the traditional wires options. So that's something that we're continuing to struggle with, and continues to be a challenge. Sorry for taking you a little bit tangent, Neetika, but I thought that this would be an opportune time to just touch on that.
Thank you, Hani. We're going to take a last question from the audience, and this one's actually geared up towards you, Ammar. And John Voss would like to ask if you could speak to the goals of Alectra's non-wires alternative pilot in York region, and let's hear your take on it, or if you want me to speak more on it, happy to.
So I was going to say, why don't we switch roles for a second? So Neetika, I have a question for you. Could you speak to Alectra's non-wire alternative?
Nicely done, Ammar. So very quickly, this is an IESO-led project in partnering with NRCan. It is kudos to IESO for taking on such an innovative project. And Alectra is very happy to partner as the LDC to land this innovation in our service territory in the South York region. And it's all about using non-wires alternatives in the CNI sector to deliver some of the local energy needs. In our case, we are growing very fast in the York region, so we have our supply is outstripping demand. Demand is outstripping supply. So looking at how we can use non-wires alternatives to meet the needs of that region. And what's unique about this project, and it's being done first time in Canada, is the interoperability between a wholesale market and a local electricity market. So all the questions that we are talking about, the or and how do you prioritize which market you can play in, and local versus wholesale, and making sure that the ISOs of the world and the DSOs of the world, distribution systems operators, how there is interoperability between the two, so that effectively we're able to use these DERs to the benefit of society as a whole across all segments of the grid. So I'm going to leave this at that. We have a last minute left, and I'm going to quickly ask for advice from the audience. We've got about, through the NSERC energy storage network, we have about over 500, 350 highly qualified persons coming out of the network. Half of them are employed in the energy sector. So I'd like your advice to this future workforce on how they can ride the energy storage wave. 30 seconds each.
Stay in school, learn machine learning, and I mean, that's really where all the innovation is going to happen, right? Is around the algorithm, machine learning, et cetera. I mean, technology will change, I think, but it is really all about the control of and dispatchability of these assets, because you're going to come to a point very soon where you can't actually put renewable energy systems on grid without having storage attached. And that's going to require a lot of controls.
Okay, I'll go next. Thanks, Dave. I think it's a really exciting time to be part of the energy sector. And by the way, that's something people have been saying for decades, right? Every time you're at a crossroad and the new chapter is beginning, but I think this time it really is beginning. So what I would encourage I think the focus is to not only just focus on the technical side of the business. I think we, as engineers, or technical people, we focus a lot on the technical side of the business, but there are other aspects of the business, for example, how the power markets work, right? What are the fundamentals of the power markets, or the regulatory, I think awareness is very important. And once you combine the fundamentals of the power markets and what the technology can do and how you can make it happen in the regulatory construct, then you have something real in hand to bring about the change or accelerate the change of pace of change. So that's what I would encourage folks to spend a little bit of time in the power markets.
Thank you. Alex and Hani, any quick word before we wrap up?
I would probably kind of echo to a certain extent what Ammar just said. The technical side is very important, but it can't be done in isolation. In isolation, it doesn't realize its full potential, as we keep saying here, right? So again, a background in power systems and power electronics is essential, but complement in regulatory, in artificial intelligence are imperative as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah, just quickly, Neetika, I think, I agree with all three, Alex, Ammar, and Dave, that, and especially for the technical people, that you got to get into these other areas. We're talking about all different options in terms of financing, the regulatory side, AI, machine learning. Those are really, really data analytics, really critical. I want to make a suggestion for those who are not technical, because this space is evolving and growing. There's a lot of people entering it with this, which is excellent. But I think there's a real need that if you're not technical, that's really important to. At the end of the day, the grid is the grid. It will operate like it's operated in the past. The same fluctuations, the same issues of stability. It's electrons, and they will act as electrons. So I think the fundamentals, I think we need to not lose sight of those. That I think that's really critical for anyone getting into the space, to understand the grid and the traditional physics. As traditional as it might be, it's still important as well.
Thank you very much. And with this, we come to the end of this second session, and a big round of applause for the panelists. Thank you, everyone.